Welcome to the Unstuck and Unstoppable podcast, where we help you move your life forward. If you've ever found yourself experiencing conflict in a relationship and do not know how to resolve it, you're listening to the right episode of our podcast today. My name's Jimn. I'm your host, and I'm here with Jolea Garza.
Hey.
Hey, how are we doing?
Great.
Come on, great. It's been great fall weather today.
Yes, I'm in my fall clothes. Listen, if you're watching, we're in Texas, and we don't get very many minutes of fall. And so I was just laughing. We're in sweaters and jackets and shackets and everything.
So funny here in Texas, the degrees can change by 20 and 30 degrees.
In a day.
In a day. You get up, you're in long sleeves and some kind of a jacket. By the end of the day, you're sweating.
Yeah, oh my God, you have to dress in layers. That's the thing.
Layers, that's right. Well, hey, we are so thrilled to have you join us. If you're watching online, hello, we're glad to see you on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, wherever it is that you consume podcasts, we are so delighted to have you join us. Today we have a great topic. We are talking about how to resolve conflict.
Yes.
And it's a part 2 of this episode from last week,
right?
Where what we actually talked about was the root cause,
which was great,
of conflict.
Yeah, but I'm really excited about today because now we know the root. We're going to help you solve it.
That's right. So we had some things we talked about, what causes. It's really there are some roots to conflict, and so if you missed it, go back. I want to encourage you to go back and listen to it. And if you listen to it, you should be here today actually with some homework that you've completed. We had a couple of things that we wanted you to do. Number one, identify the relationships in your life where you're experiencing conflict. And then the second thing is that you would evaluate the core reason as to why you think you're experiencing conflict.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully you came ready. You're like, hey, I'm ready. I've identified, I've evaluated. Here's one of the core reasons possibly. And then now today we're going to talk about really how to resolve conflict.
Absolutely.
And you can Google this. There's lots of ideas and thoughts. We're just going to give you 4 things that, for us, we actually use on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Especially leading a staff and a team and a church.
These are just things that we use. I think that even for me personally, a long time, I used to avoid conflict. I didn't want to have any conflict. So, so this has been really great. These are tools that, that we've talked through, that we've used to have healthy confrontation, healthy conflict that allows everybody to get better on the other side.
Yeah, well, let's start off with this question. If you're just joining us in this, part 1, part 2, it's okay, keep listening. But the first thing we got to ask is conflict normal?
Yes, conflict is great. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah, you don't grow without conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying. I used to avoid it because I thought that only unhealthy people, only toxic people always have conflict. If you grew up watching Maury, it's like, oh my gosh, like only those kind of people get in fights. It's like, no, it's normal for us to have conflict. You need conflict to get better.
Conflict is healthy.
Yes.
In fact, it's I would be concerned if I've got a relationship that I say is a great, thriving, valuable relationship and never have experienced conflict in it.
Yeah.
Conflict gives us lots of, it teaches us so much and gives us skills that otherwise we wouldn't have. Like we have to learn to listen to the other person. We have to learn to compromise.
Yeah, and then it opens our minds to new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways to live when you have conflict.
That's right. And so in a healthy way, conflict is good. Now, we also have been in those situations, and I'm sure everybody has experienced, where you just get vomited on or someone just tells you off. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. That's an emotional moment of anger and frustration, and many times that's immaturity. There's so many different things we could label with it, but what we're trying to say, that was my country. Trying to say. What we're trying to say is there's a healthy way to express frustration and then to resolve it.
Yeah.
Now, and here's what we said. Some conflict, there is going to be a resolution.
Yes.
Like, hey, if I stop doing this, then that resolves the conflict. But some of it is attention to be managed.
Yeah. So, and sometimes it really will just stay attention. But having to talk about it, I just want to say, before we dive into the different ways, it's okay to not get this perfect the first time. Resolving conflict is a lifetime of finding healthy ways to do it. And I would just say, as you're listening to this podcast, just commit to getting better at conflict, commit to trying to master the art of conflict. But it's a lifetime process, and we're all imperfect people. We all have lots of emotions.
Yes.
And so dealing with conflict is always going to be, intricate and different in every scenario.
And I think the key to that too is when people see your heart, and as long as you're constantly just displaying your heart, man, I got that wrong. I'm so sorry, but I want to work on this. There's a lot of grace when we get to see a person's heart. There's 4 things though. We thought here's just 4 things that we believe are going to help you. The first one, you need to evaluate the relationship. And what we mean by that is this a relationship that's worth even having a confrontation with and resolving the conflict with? Like, do I go in and try to resolve my frustration?
Yeah. It's like you're walking in the grocery store, somebody passes by you, they give you an ugly look. Are you going to chase that person down and be like, no, sit down, we're resolving this conflict right now, you hurt my feelings.
Right. Yeah. So, and there's so many relationships, I think if we're not careful, we're trying to make an investment in, because that's what really resolving conflict is, an investment into this relationship, into a relationship that really it's not going to be reciprocated, or it's just, that's not what we want to do. We want to find the relationships where, hey, it's worth me trying to resolve this conflict.
Absolutely.
And so, like your spouse.
Right.
I mean, no, that's a great relationship.
Definitely worth it.
Your kids or your extended family.
Best friends, close friends,
coworkers.
100%.
Right. And even in coworkers, there's different levels, right? Because if you're talking about a person that works in a department that I never see, but they were at the Christmas party and they frustrated me, and now I've got
your white
beef with them, and I'm going to go and make them listen to what they did and how they made me feel.
That may not be necessary.
Probably not necessary, because they're not emotionally or relationally connected or even invested in this, and it's just, you're just wasting your energy.
Yep.
So the key is, let's find the relationships that, hey, I'm going to make an investment in resolving whatever the conflict is, because it's worth it.
It's funny. It's like, choose the relationships that are worth fighting for.
That's a great statement.
Sometimes we just, avoid the conflict and don't want to have engage with anybody. But if this relationship is worth fighting for, it's worth having the conversation.
Conflict.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Second thing is, I will address the issue, not avoid the conflict. Now, this is a choice that you got to make.
Yeah.
And this is really the foundation of, look, I choose to address this issue because it's not going away.
Yes.
What will end up happening is the relationship secretly erodes from your heart, and you get angrier and angrier and angrier. They don't even know it sometimes.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's easier, and it depends on your personality type too. I will say,
you got some people that are challengers.
There's some people who are called avoiders.
Right.
So if you're an avoider, you're like, I don't want to have the conversation at all. But what happens is, even if you don't have the conversation, everything looks good on the surface, the offense is still there. And it's lingering and it's festering. And so the longer you don't have the conversation, every time that person does something else, and they could have no intention of hurting you anymore, you are keeping tally marks, and you're becoming more and more offended.
Calloused, offended, frustrated. And then what happens is, you explode on them.
Right. You turn around one day,
They're like, what in the world?
Yes,
Well, and I thought about how do you do it? Well, if I'm going to address the issue, you got to set aside time to have the meeting.
Yes.
So we always talk about it's not real unless it's in the calendar. And so just say, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time?
Right.
30 minutes of your time, and just set it aside, whether it's your spouse, your kids, I mean, whatever it is. But don't let it happen. Here's what I've seen that is ineffective, and what I've done. Confrontation or trying to resolve a conflict happens in passing. Like, you're passing by, hey, I just wanted you to know,
you hurt my
the other day you hurt my feelings, and this, I felt frustrated. You didn't invite me to the, and it all happened in passing. Well, you got to remember that they're thinking about a million different things. Their mindset is in a different way. And now you just it's not going to be productive.
Right, 100%.
So I'm going to set aside time
and sit down and have the conversation.
Yeah.
Don't let too much time pass
That's
either.
right.
Yeah. Now, a couple of days, I think it's good to maybe take some time to process what you're feeling, to process what happened, and then bring it up. But don't let a month or two go by and turn back around and be like, I'm upset with you because you hurt me, a year and a half ago. So you want to, yeah.
Well, and I was thinking a great example would be even, if you work at a company, an organization, and you're a part of a team, but every time your boss, it just seems like you get bombarded last minute with information. You feel like there's no or little communication to you or to your department. There may be little or there may be a lack of clarity on what your responsibilities are or what's expected. What happens is, as an employee, you just sit there and go week after week, and then all of a sudden you're just like, I'm tired of this.
I'm done. Yeah.
Well, you just call your boss and say, hey, listen, can we just have a few moments? There are some things that I'd like to just try to get resolved. I'm feeling some frustration. And here's a great way. I don't feel like it's your heart. I don't think it's your heart. But I'm asking if you could just meet with me so we could talk through it.
Right, absolutely. And I will say not every single teeny tiny issue needs to be addressed all of the time. Sometimes you have to be introspective, and take a second and say, am I just being, and not overly sensitive, but maybe it's just, does this just trigger me for some reason? Or really, is there a piece of ownership that needs to go to a different party that I need to address?
And then talking through it. Same thing with, with the spouse, with all of it. Like, hey, who's picking up the kids or dinner or taking out the trash? That's one of the things when I counsel young people who are about to get married, I take this whole assessment test, and it's amazing to me how that the basic question of, hey, whose responsibility is trash?
Right.
How many kids do you want? Just who's going to tuck the kids in for bed?
Yeah.
Those are pain points that can begin to build conflict in a marriage that if we don't just sit down and talk about, hey, listen, I'm feeling this, I'm sensing this. Can we get some clarity? Can we get some conversation around this? Those simple things sound very little, but it's interesting. Married couples who come in and end up with counseling, and you'll know this as well. A lot of times their issues started because they didn't confront each other on a place where there's pain or there's frustration.
Right.
And a little thing over a long time becomes a big thing.
Yes.
And we're saying, hey, look, if this relationship is worth investing in, we're not going to let little things be big things.
Absolutely.
We're just going to go ahead and start talking about it.
That's great.
Especially if the ownership of that really may fall on the way they're, either communicating, not communicating, doing or not doing, something where you feel like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just don't let it fester. I think about, if you get a dead rodent, somewhere in a trash can or something like that. If it dies and you catch it immediately and you get it out of wherever it is, it's okay. But if you let it sit, it will stink up the entire environment. That's what happens in relationships. When we let a fence sit, it messes up the entire investment. The entire environment, the entire relationship.
Yeah. That's awesome. Here's the third thing. I will respond and not react. So, when we talk about conflict, when we talk about resolving it, many times when you feel escalated, you're in a conversation, they're escalated or you're escalated, we're saying, hey, look, I'm going to choose to respond and not react. So this may not be the place nor the time to address the root of this conflict, to try to resolve it, because it could be very unproductive. If we're escalated, a lot of times what will happen is we react out of anger, frustration. It's very emotionally driven. There's usually a lot of aggression. And then it ends up fueling disagreements and division.
And oftentimes when you're reacting, you're not looking for solutions. No. Like when we're resolving conflict.
I'm trying to hear your perspective.
I was like, I really don't care about if I'm yelling and I'm emotional. Like I don't care about, us finding a solution. I just want to get my point across.
That's right.
And so that's why we're saying instead of reacting, instead of it being emotionally driven, that you just take time to respond. And responding is a lot calmer.
How many times have you reacted? Let me just say, how many times have I reacted? And then the relationship is hurt. And I got to go back and apologize. And man, I'm just learning, the older I get, it's like, just shut your mouth. Hold it up, listen, and then just say, hey, can we just come back and revisit this? And that's the respond.
Right.
Because responding gives us the ability to let our emotions dissipate, and my emotions are going to be less than what they are now. And I just have a second to breathe. Really, I would say if you get escalated, according to studies, you should not continue the conversation for at least 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It takes 20 minutes to lower your heart rate, to cause yourself to calm down, cool down, and then you can say, okay, let's talk about it, but I'm going to do it in a way that is an understanding, empathetic, conversational way that really advances the relationship, not hinders or deteriorates the relationship.
It's well thought out. I even love, in having healthy conflict, you want to ask great questions too. So as you're having that conversation, maybe it starts, a little bit heated. Take 20 minutes. Just say, hey, we're going to pause.
That's right.
20 minutes because I want to solve this issue, because your relationship is important to me. Let's take 20 minutes. Let's come back. And then as you're having that conversation, not only have you thought through now some of the things that you want to say, but then you can ask questions. And when I heard you say that, what did you mean? Or here's what I'm hearing you communicate to me. Now this is how I feel about the situation.
Well, and I found a lot of the conflict and challenges even that I've had is because I see their actions, not people's intentions. And so asking those questions many times when you get more information, it actually solves some of the conflict going inside of you because you got a different perspective.
Right.
You realize, oh, they didn't mean that intentionally. Right. They didn't. And I think that goes to the fourth thing about part of resolving conflict is that I will focus on the good and not the bad.
Yep.
How many relationships do we have where 80 to 90% of what happens is really good?
Right.
And there's only about 10%, 20% that is rough or needs real work on. And yet, if you're like me, I find myself focusing on the 10 or 20 or 5 or 2%.
Yeah.
And then it drives this negative
narrative filter.
Right.
So you say a great quote, and you've spoken about it multiple times, but it's we judge people based on their action, and we want others to judge us based on our intention.
So good.
And the truth is, if we would judge people based on their intention, and be open to think, man, the way they said that, or man, they left the kitchen a mess, and just thought, but what about their intention?
That's right.
Maybe they had good intentions and trusted that their intentions were good. Well, that would help.
100%. Well, you're in the relationship, right? So the relationship, again, they're wanting the best for you. Coworkers, maybe you can feel like, well, I don't know. But if you assume the best, it really impacts your whole filter in the way that you experience things. But if you're constantly feeling like, well, they're just out to get me, they don't like me, well, everything they do is judged in a negative light, and there's just no way to resolve conflict because the conflict is not in them, the conflict is in you.
Yeah, and it's in how you're receiving every single thing that they do.
And that goes back to where you've got to learn to be healthy and say, okay, God, how do I get healthier and really shift my paradigm? Because a lot of times we have that perspective because of past trauma. Maybe you were in a relationship, or maybe you were at a job and that person really did have something in for you. They were mean to you.
Everything had an ulterior motive.
But if you're not careful, you'll judge every relationship hereafter based on one person, instead of saying, no, that was just a one-off. That was someone that's not a normal relationship, and I choose to believe the best and not the worst.
Right.
And I love what Andy Stanley said. I learned this years ago. I think it was his podcast, but he talked about the idea of filling in the gap with trust, not suspicion.
So good. I live based off of that idea.
So tell us about it. So
you just choose trust. You choose that everybody has your best interest at heart. Everybody wants the best for you, versus suspicion, which is just assuming that people want the worst for you, that they don't have your best interest at heart.
Yeah, I was thinking even a practical thing. It happened the other day. I was talking to someone. Well, first off, we were in a meeting and someone showed up late. And it really bothers me when people are late, because I feel like you're not only wasting my time, but you're wasting everybody's time in the meeting. Well, I didn't say anything, and didn't say anything at all. And I'm thinking, man, well, the first thought is, man, I can't believe they're late.
Right.
But then the second thought was, hey, I'm not going to believe the worst.
Yeah.
I want to believe the best. I'm sure there's a
Something
reason.
came up, yeah.
And then you go back and you say, hey, man, I noticed you were late to the meeting. Is everything okay?
Right.
And come to find out, there was a real situation
Right.
as to why. In fact, they were counseling someone in a
Yeah.
very dire situation.
Right.
And so it's the fact of saying, no, I'm going to believe the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say 8, 9 times out of 10,
There really
it's
the
the truth.
intention was good.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that what people will usually do in that situation, because you don't think to, hey, let me choose trust, let me
Right.
choose to trust, then we just go off with our own assumption. And so you could have sat with that, oh, he was late and he just doesn't value my
Yeah,
time, and you
that's
could have
right.
sat with that for
And been
years
angry.
and been angry.
And there was a day, if I'm
Right.
honest, where candid, which I'm always on,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a day when I was candid. There years ago, I would have thought the
Right.
negative,
And just
then
let it sit.
you
Yep.
just sit and fester, and then you're frustrated.
Yep.
And then it shows up in your actions and your
Right.
words,
Yep,
and
how
then
you
you go back and
communicate.
you've damaged a relationship. And then when you find out later, it's like, man, wow, it wasn't even the case or the
Right.
situation.
Yep.
So there's got to be this thing of, man, I choose to believe the best. And as you do, it's amazing how it really does help you get in
Absolutely.
the right position and posture for conflict resolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So tell me, so what if you were to say conflict and resolving conflict, what's a charge you would tell people listening right now? What would you say?
I just say try. Try your hardest to take some of these and really implement them. Specifically, I would just say the react or the respond and not react is a big one.
Yeah.
And even choosing to address situations. I would say a lot of times we've just seen, and we see it all the time, where offense has just been left to just sit and fester, and relationships are broken and hurt because nobody is willing to just address the issue, to talk through it, to sit down, to have the conversation. And conflict and confrontation is hard, but it is worth it when you have people and relationships and spouses and coworkers that you want to do life with, that you want to go far in this life with.
Absolutely. Well, that's such a great charge. And I would challenge you too, if you're listening right now, identify the relationship that you have the greatest amount of conflict in right now, and just focus on that. Sometimes it can be very overwhelming
Yeah.
to say, well, I feel conflicted. No. What's the
Yeah.
biggest relationship that if you focused on would bring the greatest impact or result?
Yeah.
And then just focus on that. Just focus on one at a time. You're not going to get it right all the time. Keep letting them see your heart. And I'm excited to hear the stories. If you have a story of how you were able to work
Yes.
through some conflict, just send us an email. The information's in the description of the podcast. Also, if you want more content, free things, sign up for our email newsletter.
Yeah.
The link is in the description of the podcast. We regularly send out free things to
Absolutely.
the people that have subscribed to the newsletter. And so we'd love to keep you updated with what's going on, send you some great free stuff, resources, articles, interviews, ebooks, all of that we send out. And so check it out. We'd love to hear from you and then
Yeah.
have you join us. Well, we can't wait to be back with you next week.
Yep.
So until then, keep stepping your life forward.
Come on.
All right. Bye-bye.